Right now, as you are watching this, you are experiencing a massive, fundamental hallucination. And no, I don't mean that in a metaphorical, we live in a simulation kind of way. I mean it in the strictest biological and physical sense. You are not touching the chair you are sitting on. You are not holding your phone. You have never touched your own face. In fact, in your entire life, from the exact moment you were born up until this very second, you have never actually physically touched anything. Or anyone. Every hug you've ever had, every time you've stubbed your toe, every time you've picked up a glass of water, it was a lie. A physical impossibility. Instead, you are currently hovering, suspended a microscopic fraction of a millimeter above everything you interact with, trapped inside an invisible force field that violently repels the rest of the universe. Which sounds insane. It sounds like something someone with a very unhinged manifestation blob would say. But it's just physics. You are literally incapable of contact. I'm going to explain exactly what is actually happening when you think you're touching something. But first, you need to understand the terrifying reality of what you are actually made of. Because once you see the math behind your own body, you will realize that touching something is the most dangerous thing you could possibly do. We navigate the world through touch. It is our most primitive, reliable sense. When you're doing heavy bicep curls at the gym, struggling against the weight, you feel the cold metal of the dumbbell pressing into your palms. You feel the resistance. You feel solid. But solid is just a marketing term invented by your brain to keep you from having an existential crisis. To understand why you can't touch anything, we have to look at what you are. You are made of atoms. Everything is. Your phone, your clothes, your dog, your coffee. But atoms are not solid little microscopic Legos snapping together. They are almost entirely, terrifyingly empty space. If you took a single hydrogen atom and scaled its nucleus, the core of the atom, up to the size of a marble, and placed that marble exactly on the center line of a massive sports stadium, the electron orbiting that nucleus would be a tiny gnat buzzing around in the highest, furthest rows of the bleachers. Everything in between that marble and that gnat? Nothing. A pure, absolute void. Over 99.9999999% of an atom is just empty space. Which means that 99.9999999% of you is empty space. If we somehow possessed a magic vice grip and squeezed all the empty space out of every single human being on Earth, all 8 billion of us would fit comfortably inside a single sugar cube. You, me, the entire Roman Empire, every person who has ever lived condensed into something you could drop into your morning tea. Drop a comment right now. Look at the object closest to your left hand. How much of it do you think is actually there? Because mathematically, it's basically a ghost. So, if you are mostly empty space, and the chair you're sitting on is mostly empty space, why don't you just fall right through it? Why don't you sink into the floor like a terribly rendered video game character? Because of the gnat in the bleachers. The electrons. Electrons carry a negative electrical charge. And as anyone who has ever played with magnets knows, negative violently repels negative. When you go to sit on a chair, the electron clouds of the atoms in your pants approach the electron clouds of the atoms in the chair. And as they get close, they scream at each other to back off. They create a barrier of electromagnetic repulsion. It's like trying to push the wrong ends of two incredibly strong magnets together. No matter how hard you squeeze, they slide off each other. They refuse to connect. When you feel the pressure of sitting in a chair, your brain is just interpreting the massive electromagnetic resistance of your atoms and the chair's atoms aggressively refusing to mingle. You aren't touching the chair. You are hovering on a microscopic cushion of highly stressed electrons. This is electromagnetism. It is one of the fundamental forces of the universe. It is the reason you don't fall to the core of the Earth. It acts like a massive biological firewall, protecting your core components from everything else. Okay, but here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Because if we are just force fields pushing against force fields, then how do we explain things that break? If you drive a top-tier electric Audi saloon, we're talking the absolute highest performance models with massive horsepower straight into a brick wall at top speed, the car crumples. The wall shatters. Metal bends, glass explodes. But even in that moment of absolute, catastrophic destruction, the atoms of the car and the atoms of the wall still didn't touch. The force of the impact simply shoved the atoms out of their structural alignment. The electromagnetic repulsion was so strong that instead of touching, the atoms chose to literally rip their own molecular bonds apart just to get out of the way. The car destroyed itself purely to avoid physical contact. It's the most extreme case of social anxiety in the universe. And this next part is the reason I made this video. Because electromagnetism is only the bouncer at the club. The real reason you can't touch anything is enforced by a rule so bizarre, it fundamentally breaks how we think about reality. In 1925, a physicist named Wolfgang Pauli discovered something that won him the Nobel Prize. It's called the Pauli Exclusion Principle. And it is the ultimate do-not-cross tape of the quantum realm. The universe is made of different types of particles. The ones that make up matter, the stuff that makes up you, me, and your screen, are called fermions. And fermions are incredibly stubborn. The Pauli exclusion principle states that no two identical fermions can occupy the exact same quantum state in the exact same space at the exact same time. Think of it like a limit order on a high-end trading platform. It won't execute, it won't lock in, and it won't settle unless the exact, hyperspecific energy conditions are met. Until then, everything just hovers, pending forever in the background of reality. Or, more simply, matter refuses to share. It is illegal in the universe for two pieces of matter to be in the same place. If they get too close, the universe literally forces them apart to preserve the laws of physics. It's like trying to assign two different software elements to the exact same absolute coordinate without a container. The UI just violently repels itself and the system throws an error. So, that's the answer. You are 99% empty space, wrapped in an electromagnetic force field, bound by quantum laws that forbid physical contact. Every sensation of touch is just your brain decoding the feeling of energetic rejection. Clean, simple, slightly depressing, but done. Except, it's not. Because we haven't talked about what happens when the universe actually allows two things to touch. Because it can happen. And when it does, the results are horrifying. I need you to stay with me for 60 more seconds, because everything we just talked about assumes you are on Earth. Down here, in our atmosphere, everything is coated in a microscopic layer of oxygen and moisture. Even when two pieces of metal look perfectly clean, they are covered in a chemical film. That film acts as a buffer. But what happens when you take that buffer away? What happens in the vacuum of space? In space, there is no oxygen to create that protective layer. If you take two completely clean, bare pieces of the exact same metal and press them together in the vacuum of space, they don't just bump into each other. They weld together. Instantly. Permanently. This is called cold welding. And it happens because the atoms in the first piece of metal look across the void, see the identical atoms in the second piece of metal, and realize there is no longer any boundary between them. They forget they were ever separate objects. They just become one single, solid piece of metal. It's terrifyingly fast. It's like assuming that a virtual phone number API is going to be incredibly cheap because it's not physical, only to realize that local carrier restrictions and interconnect fees make it massively more expensive than just buying a standard SIM plan. It makes perfect sense on the surface, but the underlying mechanics completely rewrite the rules the second you deploy it. Because of cold welding, engineers building the International Space Station had to explicitly coat their tools in specific ceramics and oxides. Because if an astronaut clamped a bare metal wrench onto a bare metal bolt in outer space, the two would fuse together permanently, and that wrench would just become part of the spaceship forever. Space doesn't care about your tools. But even in cold welding, the nuclei of the atoms, the actual hard centers, aren't touching. They are just sharing electron clouds. The marbles are still miles apart in the stadium, they've just decided to share the nets. Which brings up the ultimate question. What would it actually take to force the marbles to touch? To defeat the electromagnetic force field? To break the Pauli exclusion principle? It takes the death of a star. Gravity is the weakest of the four fundamental forces. A tiny magnet on your fridge can defeat the gravitational pull of the entire planet Earth. But when gravity accumulates on a cosmic scale, it becomes an unstoppable monster. Inside the core of our sun, millions of miles away, gravity is squeezing hydrogen atoms so intensely, so violently, that it overpowers their electromagnetic repulsion. The force fields break. The atoms are literally crushed into each other, fusing their nuclei together to create helium. This physical contact releases massive amounts of energy. That energy is sunlight. Every time you feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, you are feeling the ambient heat of atoms being forced to physically touch against their will. Nuclear fusion is just the universe violently forcing a hug. But even the sun isn't the final form of touching. Because in the sun, there is still some empty space left. The ultimate, absolute form of physical contact only happens in one place in the known universe, inside a neutron star. When a massive star runs out of fuel, it collapses in on itself. The gravity becomes so incomprehensibly strong that it crushes the empty space entirely out of existence. It defeats the Pauli Exclusion Principle. It forces the electrons to literally crash into the protons, merging them into neutrons. The stadium is gone. The bleachers are gone. There are only the marbles, packed so tightly together that a single teaspoon of a neutron star would weigh 1 billion tons on Earth. It is the solid sphere of atomic nuclei, physically touching, edge to edge, with absolutely zero empty space between them. So, to recap. If you want to actually, genuinely touch something, you either have to go to the vacuum of space and merge your molecular structure with a piece of titanium, or you have to subject yourself to the gravitational collapse of a dying hypergiant star, transforming your body into a billion-ton spoonful of superdense neutron soup. I recommend just sticking with the illusion. It's significantly better for your posture. We live our entire lives suspended in a web of fields and forces. We are ghosts of empty space, piloting vessels made of ancient stardust, repelling everything we ever interact with. But maybe that's not a bad thing. When you hold someone's hand, your atoms aren't touching. But your electromagnetic fields are perfectly intertwined. Your energy is interacting with their energy. You are exchanging heat, you are sharing a quantum barrier, and your brains are flooded with oxytocin just from the proximity of your forces pushing against each other. You don't need to physically touch something for it to be real. The resistance is what makes it real. The pushback is what gives us shape, structure, and sensation. If we could actually touch things, we wouldn't exist. The repulsion is what keeps us alive. So drop a comment down below now that you know your body is functionally a hovering force field of mostly empty space. What is the weirdest texture you've ever felt in your life? Because whatever it was, your electrons hated it. Oh, one last thing. We've established you can't touch anything. But what about the things you see? Light particles, photons, they must touch the back of your eye for you to see, right? Well, actually, no. A photon doesn't touch your retina. It hits the electromagnetic field of an atom in your eye, gets instantly annihilated out of existence, and transfers its energy into an electrical signal that zaps directly into your brain. So you've never touched anything, and every piece of light you've ever seen had to die instantly just to give you the privilege of looking at it. Sleep well.